Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Off the Mat, your mental health check-in podcast for athletes across the world. Today, I'm joined with Ebed and Stephen. Ebed is a D1 national qualifier, went to Drexel University, two-time state champ, walk-on, and has gotten a full ride, has a master's in engineering, and then quit his job to be a head coach. Stephen was a national finalist, and he had the most tacks and takedowns in one season, coached at Sacred Heart University as an assistant, and then fourth head coach at Johnson Wales University, and now is an assistant wrestling coach at Iron Faith. It is nice to have you guys on the show today. How are you doing?
Doing well. Nice to be here.
Good. Very excited. Thank you for having us on here. We're very excited to be here, kind of share what we've, our experience in wrestling, what it's done for us, and kind of how we ended up where we are now.
Perfect. So let's get right into it. Ebed, I'll start with you. Tell me about your career and why did you get started with wrestling? What got you started?
Yeah, so I started with wrestling in sixth grade. I did it because my brothers were doing it. So mainly my brother Stephen, and I think Stephen got into it because my oldest brother John did it. So it kind of, one of the siblings started it, and everyone started rolling into it. I had a little bit of success early on because I was athletic. So I took like second at New England's my first year wrestling, but I didn't really know what I was doing just because I was athletic. I found a lot of success early on. I kept training, doing well, went into high school my freshman year, ended up winning a state title my freshman year. And then I kind of saw myself kind of plateau. My athleticism and strength didn't get me to the next level. I needed to get my technique. I needed to get something else better in order to jump to the next level. By my junior year, I found John Clark, who is the head coach at Sacred Heart. And that was a pretty unique story. Essentially, he was running private lessons at the club I wrestled with. And my friend was the partner for the private lesson. And my friend didn't want to wrestle that day. So he was like, no, I don't feel like doing this private lesson. Ebed, can you jump in and be like the partner for John Clark? And I was like, oh, definitely. So I ended up being the kid's partner. The kid's name is Austin Cooley. He wrestles at West Virginia right now, was actually at the NCAA tournament this past year. Cool. And ever since then, my junior and my senior year, John Clark essentially brought me around New England, and I was that partner, that training partner for all of his lessons. So I would do, 5-6 private lessons a week, just going wherever he wanted me to go and being that partner. Sometimes it was for kids that were in sixth grade, and I'm a 170-pound high school kid. So sometimes it was little kids, sometimes a kid my own size. But that helped me jump a lot of levels technique wise. And then, I had started getting more success my senior year. And like most people know, recruiting is in your junior year. So if you don't have a great junior year, by the time you're a senior, most Division I schools aren't really looking for seniors. They've already picked their senior class. So I ended up applying to a bunch of schools, and I really only got into one school. So that was a weird kind of thing because I was doing great academically, and I literally only got into Drexel University. So I got into that school. I guess didn't really have much of a choice. So I went. I talked to the coach beforehand. I was able to walk onto the team. My freshman year, I redshirted. My sophomore year, I earned the varsity spot about halfway through the season. And then my junior year, I ended up making it to nationals. And after my junior year, the finances were definitely tough. So I talked with my coach. He got me a half scholarship that year. And then my senior year, I talked to my coach again, and he ended up giving me a full ride for my senior year. So I ended up being a 2-time national qualifier. My career kind of ended pretty weird because I ended in 2020, which is when COVID happened. So right when I was going to go to nationals my senior year, it got canceled. Like a week before I was going out to nationals, tournament got canceled, and I went home, and then I talked with my brother. He already started up Iron Faith. And then I asked if I could be part of the business and kind of made a deal, and then I started doing that, as well as working engineering at Electric Boat, which is like a local submarine company or whatever. So I was doing engineering, doing Iron Faith, and then about 6 months ago, I quit my engineering job to do a full-time coach at Iron Faith and help grow that business.
Wow, that's fantastic. Stephen, what about you? Let's get you in there.
Yeah, so like Evan mentioned, I started from one of my brothers, so my oldest brother. I remember one day after like a wrestling practice, he's like, "Oh, you should do wrestling. Like you'd be good at wrestling." I was kind of a tiny kid, and so when I got to middle school, I tried out wrestling. My second year wrestling, I won middle school states. My third year wrestling, I didn't do so great. I think I took fifth at middle school states, and then going into high school, I ended up winning states twice. And I had a similar situation where I really only applied to one school, so I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do when I finished high school. I did all right in high school. I wasn't a bad wrestler by any means, but after winning 2 state titles, I had 0 coaches reach out to me. I had no clue what the recruiting process was. I had, I'd planned on like, oh, I want to go away for school. I want to go wrestle somewhere, but really I had no understanding of what that process was. And so I ended up meeting Kyle Conego, who was one of the assistant coaches at Johnson Wales at the time, at one of the USA like youth wrestling tournaments. And so I talked to him for a bit. He's like, "Oh, come by, check out the school." So I didn't know much about Johnson Wales at all, really. I knew they had a wrestling program, but that's about as far as the extent was for me. So I go and look at the school. I met Lonnie, the head coach. I met Brian Allen. I met Gilbert, and pretty much once I met them, I was like, "Oh, these are great coaches. I really get along with them well. I could see myself in this program." And so I decided to go to Johnson Wales. So I was commuting my freshman year. I was splitting matches. So I was the varsity guy, and then kind of towards the end of season, one of the guys cut down in a weight class and beat me for my wrestle off. So here I am. I did well. I did fairly well in high school. I won states twice. I thought I was pretty good. And now I'm JV on my college team. And so for me, that was kind of one of the turning points. Like, hey, like if I want to accomplish something big, like I really need to start taking this serious. I kind of need to double down on my training. And kind of as this was happening, I got into my junior year, and my junior year of college was Ebed's senior year of high school. So I took a redshirt year in college to help coach him for his senior year of high school. And kind of in that process, I got to learn what it's like to coach. And I kind of really got passionate about it. So I really loved coaching. I liked, helping Ebed to accomplish what he was trying to accomplish and get him off to wrestle Division I. And when he left to Drexel, I took over his position of being the partner for Austin Cooley and some of these other guys. And I had been wrestling for quite a long time at Mayo Quanchi, which was the club we wrestled at, and which I married the coach's daughter. That's a story for a little bit later, maybe. But and he essentially gave me a big passion in wrestling as well. And at the time when I was in college, that club had a main focus of judo during the off season. And so when I started wrestling with John, I essentially spent all this time, 15 hours a week, constantly wrestling, sometimes 4 or 5 lessons in a day. That kind of helped me get my wrestling to the next level. And so by the time I was a senior, I ended up taking second in the country for Division III. I ended up setting the record for the most takedowns in a single season, which is 272, and the most tech falls. And so for me, part of why I took wrestling so serious, because I knew at some point I was going to coach, and everything I learned I could pass on to, whoever I was coaching. So for me, I always knew that, running a club or coaching in some fashion was going to be part of my life. So a big thing that pushed me as an athlete wasn't just what I wanted at that very moment, which was winning a national title, but it was also because I knew everything I learned now I'm going to be able to give back, to the kids kind of in our club.
Absolutely. I mean, you guys have some fantastic stories, just going to college and making the most out of it. How many siblings do you guys have?
There's 8 of us total. 6 boys, 2 girls. Yep, 6 boys, 2 girls.
And where do you guys fall in? Are you the oldest, youngest, kind of middle end of the pack?
So I'm the third. So I got an older brother, older sister, and then it's me. Then there's one in between me and Ebed, and then there's a handful more, and then the youngest one, Michael, actually wrestled kind of with us as we were opening the club. So he was the last. He kind of had a late start. He started freshman year, but he had a similar story where his freshman year of high school, he didn't win one match. Well, the only match he won, he got illegally slammed. So I show up to come watch him wrestle, and he's wrestling some absolutely jacked kid. Kid picks him up overhead and slams him. Mike's laying there like, I like you when someone gets slammed, you're not, you can't breathe. He's laying there. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I'm like, there's no way he's gonna continue wrestling. Like he is for sure like never wrestling again. And so like about a half hour goes by, he comes up to me, he goes, how do I stop him from doing that? And I'm like, man, he's hooked. Like if he can get past that, like he's hooked. And um so I coached him from freshman year up through senior year, and Ebed coached him as well towards his junior senior year. And he ended up going from literally not winning a single match except for the illegal slam match to winning a state title, placing third at New England's, and placing at Virginia Beach National. So, another testament to like what you get out of the sport when you put a lot of work into it and you have coaches that care and put time into you. So
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like, was it always wrestling? I guess my question is, and was this kind of got what you guys were doing? You're coming up, you're coaching at the same time. Were your older siblings doing the same thing? Or are you guys kind of starting it? And are you guys considered a wrestling family?
So essentially, we did a lot of different sports starting out. I know, like I swam. Well, we all swam for
Oh,
a
okay.
while because our parents didn't want us drowning. So we started out with swimming.
That's the best
Um,
thing to do.
yeah, and then most of the, I think every single one of the brothers wrestled, but they kind of, some people just took it to different extents. Like my
Mm.
oldest brother, who essentially is the person who got us, I guess, all into it. I think he only wrestled a couple of years. And then my brother Mike just wrestled through high school. My brother Nathaniel, um, he wrestled till sophomore year. And then my brother David wrestled a little bit too. So all the guys in the family did some sort of wrestling. We're definitely considered a wrestling family.
Mm.
I would say, uh, especially in our area or whatever. But we did a handful of other things. I just liked wrestling so much more than everything else because the technique is so fun. I don't know if that makes sense, but like swimming, football, soccer, a lot of the other sports, um, I felt like I was limited with the learning. I'm sure there's like a lot of details in all the specific things, but like for
Hmm.
swimming, there's 4 strokes, right? And then you only pick one of them, really, and then you get good at that one. So you're only working on one technique. But with wrestling, there's like an unlimited amount of moves. You can kind of pick and choose which ones you like. So I love the aspect of that, and I also think I just like beating up kids and on the mat. You know what I mean? It's fun. It's a lot more enjoyable than like swimming's like you have to hold your breath. Whoever can hold your breath the longest like wins. I'm like, that's not fun. It's like
Oh my
that's
God.
tough. But yeah, we're definitely a wrestling family, but we've done we've done plenty of other sports.
yeah, and similar story with me. Like I grew up swimming. I played football for a little bit. I played soccer, but pretty much once I hit the wrestling mats, it was like, oh, this is the sport for me. Like I had still done some other stuff for a little bit, but there was something about wrestling that anyone who's done it for a season understands. Like it's so hard, and there's something about like being able to go into a room and like push yourself as hard as possible and kind of grind it out. It allows for the person who's maybe not the most athletic to win. Whereas, in football, to a certain extent, like if you're not like 230 pounds, 6 foot something and jacked out of your mind, like you're gonna get crushed. And I see like a lot of high school kids who are like, oh, it's my junior year of high school, like I'm gonna go try out for the football team. They're like 125 pounds. I'm like, it's some guy's gonna come around the corner and flatten you or like blow both your knees out. And I'm not saying that they can't, people can't play any sport by any means, but there's less of that physical limit in wrestling as far as it goes for like your just genetics. Like you could be a short, skinny kid. You could be tall and heavy. Like you kind of get to work with whatever your natural abilities are and then kind of play to your strengths. And so to me, I found that very interesting where it's like, I mean, I might not be the fastest kid, but I can still win a wrestling match. Or I might not be the strongest kid, but, I can push myself until this guy gets so tired, he literally gives up. Like there was something to that I really loved, and I think on top of that, winning in a wrestling match is, a better high than any other win. Like, you win in a swim meet. It's like you just get out of the water and you look around like, oh, that was cool. Like there's something about a wrestling match. It's like you and one other person, and like you're both going as hard as you possibly can. And it's like when you win that, it's like, what else is there to say? Like, I'm not going to get mad if someone says like, oh, I can beat you in basketball. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But like, no, I can beat you in wrestling. So it kind of like there's something to prove in that too, I think.
I guess my thing that I'm noticing a commonality between you two is that you have such high energy and optimism for the sport, and I've seen it on and off the mat, and even right now in the this conversation that we're having. Where did that come from, and was there somebody that inspired you to kind of keep going down that track of wrestling? I know you mentioned John Clark.
Yeah, I think for me, I've been blessed with so many good coaches. Like, from my middle school coaches all the way up. My club coaches, Serge Buisu. I married his daughter, and to me, like all the coaches I've had, I think were such a big impact in my life that it kind of caused me to like wrestling more. Even if I had a bad coach, I think I still would have wrestled. I'm not saying that was the only thing, but I really had coaches that cared about me. And I think that was part of why I like the sport so much. So I really, I would say I attribute most of my passion from the coaches just really caring about not just how I do in wrestling, but just my life in general.
Yeah, and we pretty much had very similar coaches. Same middle school coach, Bobby Rodricks, and each kind of coach we had, same club coach. I mean, he was my coach in high school, and then we had Clark. We had different college coaches, obviously, but I think each coach kind of gave different things to me. You know what I mean? Like the first coach I had in middle school, he would just make you go. It was probably the hardest practice I could ever think of. So my hardest practices I remember in my life were my middle school practices. So there was like something about like that right off the rip, learn how to work hard. It was, I don't run the practices like that, but they were like the way we would start off with like a 4 mile run. So we were dying before the practice even started. You know what I mean? Like some crazy,
It'd be like a
whatever.
4 mile wind sprint.
Yeah. Start running the hallways.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, I'm glad you said that because I remember my practices when I was in middle school and like just before high school. I remember personally that I went to this camp in Danbury actually because I'm from Danbury, Connecticut, and it was called the Mustang Camp. And I remember going there. We get there at 7 a.m. and they're like, "All right, you're gonna run 10 laps on the track to start off with, no warm up." And I'm like, okay. And then after that, we were on the I think we were on the field. They had us doing sit-ups for however long they wanted us to do. They'd be like, hold it. And then you'd get so tired that it's like, I don't even know where I'm at anymore. And like, we're just 12 and you got people all the way from like 5 to 15 wrestling. And we're just there for like 3 hours, which felt like all day. And so there's definitely some truth to the hardest practices are definitely when you're in middle school. Most memorable for sure. And, so I think it's really funny that you said that because I remember that very vividly.
Yeah. It's even like the first experiences of like what it's even like going hard. Like, I think as you like from middle school to high school, like I think you work harder, but it's like those first experience of like what's wrestling really about. It's like you're doing wind sprints and then you're wrestling so you're about to pass out and you're like, you're just, but at the same time, like you can't slow down because someone's trying to, beat the crap out of you. So you're like I got to get off a bottom and I got to get back after it. So it's like you have these emotional ups and downs in the sport too. But, part of what I enjoy in wrestling is that. Like, I like to work hard. And I think, most people who like wrestling enjoy working hard. You got to enjoy practice. Not to say you have some practice that you don't feel like being there, but there's something about a wrestler where it's like you just know how to grind it out. And it's such, in my opinion, I think that's one of the best skills you get from wrestling. Because at some point wrestling comes to an end. It's like really the tools you get from wrestling you now need to go and apply in your life, whether it's your relationships or your work or whether you're coaching or whatever it is. But it's like, wrestling is a sport, and what you learn in it are tools to help you in life. And that's kind of what I think, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'll just get right into that. You mentioned the highs and lows of wrestling in life. Uh, Wrestling is not as easy as it looks. You and John Clark will always say, wrestling is easy. I actually am not going to say wrestling's easy. It's simple because, like, it's easy, it's simple to figure out, but like, yeah, just do that. It's like, well, that other person doesn't want me to do it, so it makes it a lot harder. But going into that, there are a lot of other things than just going onto the mat. There's weight cutting, there's getting places on time, there's putting the right food in your body. With all these variables in mind can, really change the demographic of a match / even your career. How do you guys manage that, especially at a high level? Ebed, you're a D1, Stephen, you're a D3. Not saying that, tiers wise, but just you personally, how did you manage the adversity with just getting on the mat before that, preparing, and how can people manage that for themselves if they're looking to replicate what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things I think is very important is putting yourself in the right community.
Hmm.
So when I was in college, I had to balance the academics. I was getting my master's in engineering, and I had to balance trying to win a national title in my mind, right? And in each of those aspects, I found someone that wanted similar goals to me,
Hmm.
and that helped me um, stay focused. And so for academics, my friend Nick Widman, we would do it together, right? We would hold each other accountable. Same thing with the wrestling. I wanted to get an extra workout in. I call him up. We go get an extra workout in. And then, with all the other stuff, if you're having trouble with academics, you got to find a teacher that can help you out. If you're having trouble with weight cut, you got to go to a coach that understands it or another wrestler that understands it. So the nice thing I think about most Division I programs is a lot of them, they have those resources to help you out. So if you're having difficulty with the weight cut, if you're having difficulty with your academics, our coaches at least were very much on top of us. Um, so, and then once you find the rhythm of a lot of the things, it's not too hard to just keep doing it. So you find the rhythm of the training. Um, for the weight cutting side of things, you find the rhythm of every single week you got to make weight, so you know exactly. Once you figure out how to do it once, you just mimic that over and over and over and over again every week.
Hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, as far as a lot of the other stuff, like even the emotional side of things, like having a friend there is nice. You know what I mean? If you lost a match, you lost your varsity spot. Um, I think having a community to help you get through those difficult situations is going to be the biggest thing, because there's going to be, like you said, there's a lot of variables. So you want to make sure that you have a strong community that will help you get through each of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And to second that, like my college coach Lonnie Morris would say, if you want to storm the island, you got to burn the boat. And it's kind of like this philosophy of being all in. And for me, at least, when I'm all in, like when I've decided, like when I've made a decision, I go all in on it. Like there is no backup plan. Like this is the option, and I chase after it. That's kind of when I feel the most fulfilled. Not necessarily just happy, but fulfilled. Like, hey, I've got a purpose here, and I'm heading in the right direction. And for me, when I was training, that was my only focus. Yes, I did my school. Like I did good in school. I'm not saying that wasn't my focus, but it was like my main focus was like, I'm here to try to win a national title. And so almost everything I was doing was kind of had the, thought of, is this going to help me go closer to my goal, or is this going to pull me further away? And then on top of that, just like Ebed said, surrounding yourself with the right people. And that's not just, that's not just in wrestling, but in life. Like you need mentors for you, emotionally, or you need your wrestling coach, a strength trainer. You need someone helping you maybe with your academics. And then once you're finished with wrestling, you need someone maybe helping you with finances, someone helping you with, marriage, helping raising kids. Like life is not really a journey by yourself. And so when you surround yourself with good people or the right people, it makes a big impact on your life. And I've done that. And I think the same with Ebed. Like it's really been about who we've surrounded ourselves with and, chasing after the goal. And at least for me, like now that I'm done competing, like I don't wrestle and I'm not really training in wrestling. But basically like my goal now is based around the club, like getting more members in the club, opening more locations, like trying to help as many people learn wrestling. And so for me, that's kind of my singular focus as far as it goes for like my goal. Like my goals are related to what we're trying to do with the club. And like as long as I'm doing things to help me get closer to that, I feel like, all right, I'm doing the right things. When I sit around at home for a week or a couple of days even, I'm like, I'm antsy. I'm like, I got to get out of here and go do something. Like I just feel like I'm wasting my time.
Absolutely. You guys talked about, I have a quote here. It says, winning a state title is not as important as family needs in marriage. I feel like that kind of sums up what you were trying to say, Stephen, in the fact that you guys make, when I hear you guys speak, it's a general consensus of like, it's more than just wrestling. It's not just wrestling, but the things that you do off the mat are just as important as what you do on the mat. Can you kind of unpack that philosophy for me again, and kind of where did you get that from, and how do you relay that message to your kids now that you have a whole club?
Yeah, definitely. So where I was going with that quote is essentially, a lot of people, they talk about, once there's a quote from Dan Gable, once you've wrestled everything else in life, it's easy. And it's definitely not true, right? It's just wrestling is going to prepare you for those things. The more you can push yourself in wrestling, um, the more you'll be prepared to get through those difficult situations later on. So maybe it's most physical difficult. Maybe it's physically the most difficult thing, right? Wrestling might be physically the most difficult thing, but dealing, like now that me and Steven were both married, marriage is much more difficult than getting through a wrestling practice. Raising kids, I got one kid, another one on the way, is more difficult. So, if you're not pushing yourself in wrestling, or you're not pushing yourself when you're younger, you're not going to be prepared for these situations later on in life. You know what I mean? You're not, like, if you can't get through a difficult workout, it's gonna be very hard for you to get through, a lot of the other challenges you're gonna face. So what we want to teach to our kids is, you know, put the work in now, push yourselves now, so that you can continue to work harder later, right? And we even talked about this earlier. The middle school practices for us were the hardest, right? We thought about, they're the hardest, but they may actually have really not been the hardest. We might just been gotten tougher, right? As we got tougher, the practices become easier. So as you get tougher with wrestling, and then doing wrestling and school and juggling everything on top of each other, you get into the real world or post your wrestling career. That hard work doesn't stop. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I mean by that. The work you put in early on is just going to prepare you for that. The stuff that matters more, right? Because you may not accomplish that national title, right? Me and Steven both had a goal to win a national title, right? And we may not have accomplished that, but we can look back on our career and say we put in all this work, and it wasn't a waste. Because even if we didn't accomplish our goals, all the things that we've learned, and not just the techniques, but learning how to work hard, is going to carry on for us in our challenges later on in life.
Yeah. And like Evan said, like it's such a good point. It's not necessarily work hard now so that things are easy later. It's like you're working hard now to learn the skill of working hard. Like that itself is a skill. And I think when people work hard at anything, there's something about that I think makes, gives you some fulfillment in your life. I think very few people who sit around and do nothing are feeling fulfilled. Like whether you're, even just like lifting weights, like you go and lift weights, you're going to feel better when you leave. You go into a wrestling practice, you're going to feel better when you leave. Like you may not feel like doing it from the start, but it's learning that skill of working hard. It's learning that skill of doing things you don't feel like doing at the moment to get you to where you want to get to. And it's really, at least for me, that's been a big part of what has gotten me to where I am now. And I had set, when I first started the club, I had set goals that right now we are way past. And it's like, as I start approaching the goals, I start to set new goals, further ahead. And so if I was like, oh, I accomplished my original goal, now it's time for me to, sit home and relax and do nothing for the rest of my life. That's a pretty boring life. It's like my thought, at least with what we have, it's like if I have the ability to go and open more locations and find the right coaches and help these kids learn wrestling, then I should be doing that. So to me, it's like the more I do, the better I feel.
Yeah, I mean, to further that too, I think I saw Ebed talk on Instagram one time. He said you have to set some unrealistic, like obnoxious goals, but then have in mind that you may not achieve them. But that's the reason for the goal, is the fact that you are not going to possibly achieve that goal. Can you kind of unpack what you meant by that? I think it was either both of you probably said the same thing one time, but definitely unpack that for us. What does that mean?
Yeah, essentially, what it means is a lot of people are going to put limits on themselves. They're going to put a goal that's super easy so that they know they're going to accomplish it, and they won't have the feeling of, they'll have that bad feeling after you don't accomplish it,
Mm,
right? After I didn't All-American or win a national title, after Stephen didn't win a national title, we're crying our last match we lost. You know what I mean? If we set a goal of being varsity and our goal was never to win a national title, then we wouldn't have to feel that. You know what I
mm-hmm.
mean? So a lot of people set super easy goals because, one, they may not want to work that hard, right? And two, they don't want to feel upset once they don't accomplish that goals. So we want to push people past what they want to limit themselves to. Like, kid
Mm-hmm.
comes up to me and says, "Yeah, I'm JV. I want to be varsity." All right. Well, how about you set a goal a little higher to place at states? I mean, you're JV. Let's try to make it so you can place at states the next year. Or if your goal is to place at states, well, why not just win a state title? You know what I mean? And you just keep kind of pushing. We want to push our students' goals further down the line,
Mm-hmm.
like bigger and bigger goals. And then we want to talk to them about, well, what is that really going to take? Right. So after you set that big goal, you have to sit down and think, what is it actually going to take? What are people doing that are winning a state title? You know what I mean? You're telling me
Yeah.
you're telling me your new goal is to win a state title, but you're missing half the practices in the off season or whatever. So yeah, the main thing of that is just like, we want people to dream big, set big goals. And this is something that Steven said in the past, is set a goal that you're actually going to care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, winning a national title is awesome. That's a great goal. Like, that's something you can care about. If like varsity is okay, but it's like that's not, who cares if you're varsity? You know what I mean? You
Mm-hmm.
won't even really, might not even care for a couple of years. You'll be upset that you didn't try harder and try to do something bigger. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So we don't want people to leave anything on the table. Just set a bigger goal, dream bigger, work harder, and try to accomplish those things.
How has that worked for you guys though? Give me an example, or tell me about a time when, mentally you have to really prepare or push through in a match, because, we all know that wrestling is physically taxing, but not many people know about the mental game of it, regardless in the preparation or even on the mat. What's a time where you really had to mentally go through something in wrestling, and how'd you get on top of that? How'd you overcome it?
Yeah, for sure. I got a few, everyone's got who's wrestled has those type of stories. And for me, you know, one of mine was a season, you know, a kind of a whole season of it, which was my senior year. So my junior year of college, I qualified for nationals, and I ended up going 1-2. And the 2 matches I lost, like I got pinned in like a minute. And here I am thinking like, man, I thought I was close to getting on the podium, but I got absolutely crushed. I got like fireman's and pinned in like twice in like a minute. And I'm sitting there like, you know, what am I doing with my entire life? Like, yeah, and that's how it is when you lose. Like you start rethinking like every decision you've ever made. And then I'm losing again. I got taken down like 9 times in a match. And I'm just like, you know, after leaving that my junior year, like I leave nationals. I'm like, man, I thought I was way closer than I really was. And so, you know, I doubled down. I kept training hard. And then going into my senior year, in the first week of competition, so the first 2 tournaments, I had more takedowns than I did in the entire year before. So we had two back-to-back tournaments, and I was pushing like 80, I think almost like 80 takedowns in 2 weeks. And one of my coaches was like, you know, you should try to, you know, beat all, you should set a goal. He said, you should set like a goal of trying to beat all the other people in the takedowns except the guy was number 1. Cause he was like way further ahead of everybody. And I'm thinking in my head, I was like, I'm like, who sets a goal to be number 2? I'm like, that's crazy. So after that, like I made it a point to like push myself as hard as I could in my matches, get as many takedowns as I could. And 2 of the things I was doing, like one, I was chasing the takedown record, but I also had this thing in my head that I would tell myself where it was like, if I want to be a national champ at the end of the year, like I need to wrestle a certain way in every single one of these matches. Like I can't just, you know, I can't give it 50% in my matches and just barely squeak out a win against kids I should be dominating and then go expect to do well at nationals. So for me, I took every single match as like, this is going to be the hardest match of my life, whether this kid is good or not. Like I'm giving it 100%. I'm trying to score as many points as I can. And what that did is that set me up for when I was in those tough matches. It gave me the confidence to pull the trigger on my attacks because I'm like, I've been taking people down all season. So it's no different now. So for me, I actually had a match. I don't know if it was my semifinals or quarterfinals at nationals where I took the kid down and like rode him out, and you know he gets out on bottom second period, and so like the score ended up being like super close. And in my head, I'm like, I should be beating this kid by a lot. Like it should not be this close. And somehow we get in a scramble, and next thing you know, we're overtime. Coach throws the brick, and I'm playing this back in my head like I did not put all this work in and push myself in every match and every practice to get here and hold back in this match. And so overtime comes, I shot like right off the whistle, getting a scramble, take the guy down. And for me, it was just like those moments were like, man, like this is what I was training for the whole time. And like, even though I fell short in the finals, to me, it was like, if I never push myself and set high goals of winning nationals, I probably would have never placed. My high goal was winning nationals, and I had set that goal. Partly because of some of the coaches I had who were forcing me to think bigger. Because a lot of coaches, like you go into a high school room or college room or whatever, you know, the coaches sometimes set like a certain goal, like, oh, you want an All-American. And for me, it was like, the last thing I want to do is set a goal of All-American and then fall short and not get that at all. So it was like, I'd much rather set that goal of winning. And then if I fall short, maybe I place. And so for me, it was like part of setting the goal, like what Ebed said, part of setting the goal higher is that you end up doing more work because you want to achieve the goal. And it also stops you from putting as much limits on yourself, because I think just in my college career, like we've had a lot of wrestlers on the team who had more potential than I did. but they faded out because they didn't believe, or they didn't set their goals high enough, or they didn't care that much, or whatever the reason. And or injuries. There's a lot of reasons why it doesn't happen. But for me, it was like, I'm going to set the biggest goal I possibly can. And at the time, that was to win nationals, which was the highest kind of competition that I had been in.
Got you. Ebed, I have a question for you. How did you measure your progress towards your goals? Because obviously goals, something that's not measured is you can't keep track of it. You don't know how good you're doing. How did you personally give me a time where you had to really measure your progress to achieve or maybe even fail a goal that you had?
Yeah, so there's essentially you want to have your main goal, and then you want to have smaller goals that will help you achieve that. So the way I did it was I had a similar goal. I wanted to be a national champ. Um, and the smaller goals that kind of helped me see if I was going to be able to achieve that was not necessarily like win a conference title, because I don't think, or like win the districts or whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
you don't have to win, because I don't think that's necessarily like, you don't need to win your district necessarily to win a national title. And I don't know if that necessarily helps, because if you lose your districts, are then you going to give? But you're going to nationals. Are you going to give up on your, what I mean? Well, you're already there. You're like, well, I probably won't win now because I didn't win my conference tournament.
Hmm.
Um, but the goals you want to set are actually, I think, in the practice room and in the matches, and in the like dual meet matches, the regular season matches. So one of my goals that really helped me out, and it's actually something that Steven would talk to me about, was um, try to get 100 shot attempts in the practice room every time you wrestle live. So I made these smaller goals in the practice room that were achievable no matter what. So what I mean is I didn't make my goal 100 takedowns. My goal was 100 like attacks,
Mm.
which means you should be able to do that no matter what, because all you got to do is just attempt a takedown. So I think it's important to, in addition to your long term goal, you set these goals in the practice room that are like that you should be able to achieve. If that makes sense. Like still big goals, like 100 takedown attempts. Um, maybe you pick the guy that you can't take down in the room. I'm going to take him down 3 times. By the end of this month. And then what Steven was talking about, he was setting goals, get the most takedowns, right? And he knew that if he could focus on that takedown record, he would be wrestling the right way in those matches. So in addition to that big goal, set yourself some goals in the practice room, in matches that will help you to achieve that goal. And it will do one of two things. One, it will make you train harder, right? But two, if you actually start accomplishing those smaller goals, it's going to give you that confidence, right? Steven's going into nationals with the most techs in the country. I'm sure he has some confidence that he can win a national title now. But if he like lost 30% of his matches during the season and was getting beaten up in practice, going to that national tournament, he probably wouldn't have that much confidence. So it's important to just believe you win a national title, but you should have some smaller goals that you can hit that will help give you that confidence in addition to just, I don't know, saying you can do it.
Got you. So, what is Iron Faith? Tell me about your philosophy with that, and what exactly where are you going? Where do you see you guys self in the next 5 years? I mean, you're a growing program. You guys have a couple hundred. I think you have a couple tens of thousands of followers on TikTok and Instagram. You have a lot of content that you post. Your wife does the judo side of things, and you have other coaches. Tell me where you want to go with your club.
Yeah. So really, we got started, and the reason why I named the club Iron Faith was kind of twofold. It's, both of us, are Christian. So for me, a big part of, well, I guess, the main thing for everything I do in my life is because of what I believe in. And so I wanted to be put in situations where when people ask, hey, what does Iron Faith mean? This, that, and the other, like it put me in a position where I had to speak up about my faith. And not to say that every person in the club has to be a Christian or anything like that, but really like our core values are Christian based. And then the other part is really Iron Faith is like strong faith, iron strong. So it's like strong faith. And part of that is because if you are going to set these big goals, you've got to believe that it's possible. If you don't have the faith and you don't believe it's possible, you're not going to put the work in to actually make it happen. And so it's kind of reminded me and reminded us of, as we set our goals, to kind of reach for big goals and push ourselves constantly, and then believe it can happen and do the work to make it happen. And, we have certain goals, and, I don't know if it's actually going to play out. I can't, obviously nothing's promised in life, but for us, my big goal is I want 100 locations is what I'd like. I want 100 locations, and I have no clue how long that'll take. I have no clue if that will actually happen. But for me, it's like I'm going to do as much as I possibly can to help get us there. And it's not necessarily, part of it is that, like, if we get 100 locations and we've got 200-300 students in each location, like, we're really going to make a big impact on and wrestling in the sport, but also on the kids. And like we've talked before, wrestling is more or less a tool for lessons in life. And so, as much as I love the sport of wrestling, this is kind of our way of, helping young men turn into men, or young girls turn into women. It's kind of like we're trying the best we can to help them to grow as a person as well as, an athlete.
So, with that being said, Rhode Island is a really small state. Connecticut and Rhode Island, I feel, are in the same avenue of which they have really great wrestlers, but they're not like powerhouses like Pennsylvania and New Jersey. How does your club compare to those, or what are you trying to bring into Rhode Island that maybe New Jersey and Pennsylvania is bringing into that can maybe be beneficial or get these kids prepared and in the rooms with D1 guys, D3 guys like you guys are?
Yeah, so there's twofold in this. So a lot of people talk about growing wrestling. So, like, we have these Rhode Island wrestling meetings that I go to sometimes, but people talk about, like, growing wrestling, and there's kind of two different things in that they mean. Like, one is getting more people to just participate, like just more people wrestling, and the other part is getting the people who are wrestling up to a higher level. And so there's kind of twofold. For us, it's like we want to get as many people as possible to try wrestling. And then it's like, as we provide a good experience with the right coaches, they will really enjoy that and they'll become more passionate about it. And then they'll put the work in to get very good. And so I think that's kind of how it plays out is one, it's a little bit of a numbers game where you're trying to get as many people as you possibly can to get the experience of what wrestling's really about. And then from there, helping the kids who are passionate about it to set big goals and kind of get, put the work in to actually accomplish it. So for us, we're, our second location that we're planning to open up is, we're kind of putting it in a town, and then we'll draw basically from the town that it's in and then maybe the neighboring ones. There are there's some clubs in Rhode Island that are very, very good, and people will drive 45 minutes. People will drive an hour to practice, but most people are not going to do that. And so for us, it's like we need to bring the wrestling to the people, not so much be like, hey, we have this one spot and it's like, you better drive an hour and a half to get here, because like most people are just not going to do that. Like I didn't do that. Maybe as I got better into college, I would have done something like that, but most people are not going to drive an hour and a half to a practice. So for us, it's like we know there's enough people in each town to build a solid foundation of wrestling in each of these towns. So I don't know if it's going to actually play out, but our plan is really to have one of these clubs in each town in Rhode Island.
Ebed or Steven, how has social media impacted your camp? I mean, you guys have a big following. Have you driven traffic from that following? And if so, have you kind of come across different kids, different people, different backgrounds? And how has that tested you as being coaches in the Rhode Island area?
Yeah, so I focus on the social media side of things, the marketing side of things, and the biggest problem with any business is nobody knows who you are.
Yes.
All right. So the biggest problem with the business is nobody knows who you are. Yeah, maybe people in the wrestling community might know who you are, but if you walk into a grocery store and you ask 100 people, nobody knows Iron Faith Wrestling. Maybe one. You know what I mean? I walk into the grocery store right across the street, maybe from my club. Oh, what do you mean? Because it's not popular, and nobody knows. There's so many businesses out there. Why would they know who you are?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you battle that? You essentially put as much content out as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Quality content, obviously, technique, advice. I'm just pushing content out there to get in front of people. That's the first thing, like just so they can see my face again and again and again, Steven's face, Caitlin's face. It's talking about, and so one, get in front of them as much as possible. The second thing is, what type of content are you putting out there? Right? Technique is great, but what I found is really good is it's got to be even more valuable than that. Because there's a lot of people putting out technique. So the content that's most valuable is the advice that you can give them, a life story, similar to this podcast. Like, that's actually the most valuable thing. So breaking these podcasts up and in those little bits and pieces of advice, those are the things that can impact somebody. Because yeah, like learning a technique is great, but if someone understood about that goal aspect, like they saw the video, how to whether it's a kid or a parent, how to set a big goal, don't limit yourself, and they believe that, that's way more impactful than them learning like a technique. So we try to get in front of as many faces as possible. We use social media to do that. It's definitely helped us get members, get people to our camps. And there has been some cool stories. You know, we get messages from some people that bought our technique videos saying, like, sending a video of their kid slamming somebody with one of the moves, saying, "Oh, thank you so much, Coach Caitlin, for, tell me when you have the next technique video out." So there are
That's
those
got to be
cool.
satisfying.
Yeah. Because, one, like, again, our goal, 100 gyms, that's a great goal, but you can always reach more people and impact more people with social media.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, if we can get into that space better and impact people through that, we can impact people throughout the entire world. And it takes a lot less effort than opening up 100 gyms or whatever.
Tell me how you guys had to transition from, okay, now you're wrestlers, you've coached each other a little bit. How different is I would say, your approach towards now you're coaching a group of people, you're responsible for all these kids, and walk me kind of through your mindset and your mentality of running a whole gym like this now and having a bunch of kids to look after and now kind of guiding that into the path that you want it to be. How frustrating is that?
Yeah, so we kind of, I guess in the business, we've kind of taken different roles at different times. And so when I first opened, I was the one who did the coaching. We got shut down during COVID. We reopened in a new space. And as Ebed quit his engineering job to be coaching full time, I kind of started to step down from some of the coaching positions. So I basically was the head coach. He was the assistant. And then we kind of switched roles where now he's the head coach. And then we hired assistants under him. And so now my job is to go in, find some of these other coaches to get the second facilities. But through this whole process, we've kind of mapped out, our style of coaching and what we're looking for and what we want to kind of bring to the table. And for, one of the things, I'll let Ebed speak more about this because he's really running the wrestling program now, but one of the things that was very important to me as I wrestled was the coaches who pointed out what you were doing right. And so this was something I kind of learned from, oddly enough, from watching YouTube videos on like dog training. And it was like this, I don't know, it was like a bull mastiff or something. It was some type of dog where they were saying like, if all you do is discipline the dog and tell it what not to do, all the dog knows is what not to do. And so it's going to go crazy thinking, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. But instead, if you give the dog tasks to do, then you don't have to worry about all the not to do things. And so with that, I think in wrestling, a lot of times coaches say, don't do this, don't put your head here, don't do that, careful of this, careful of that. And so as a wrestler, you're now sitting there going, I only know what I'm bad at, and I only know what I shouldn't be doing, as opposed to when a coach is pointing out everything that is good. Now that wrestler knows, hey, I know exactly where I want to be when I'm wrestling. I know what positions I'm good at. And so their focus is on getting to where they're good, as opposed to avoiding all possible bad things. Like, you in wrestling, you do not need to be good at every single move. Like, it's not even possible. So the best wrestlers know where they're good, and they try to get there as much as possible. And then the other thing it does is it builds their confidence in it. Like, the last thing we want is a team full of kids who have no confidence and are afraid to attack and are afraid of being wrong. Like, you can be wrong in wrestling. You can make mistakes. Like, it does happen. Like, you can't wrestle perfect matches. But if you know what you're good at and you focus on getting there, that's where you're going to see, or that's where you're going to make the biggest growth as an athlete. Not so much being like, oh, I know I'm bad at this and I know I'm bad at this and don't do that and don't do this. It's like, figure out what to focus on that you're good at and put all your attention on that instead.
Yeah, and there's two aspects to the coaching side. One's the technique, which we've done a pretty good job. I'm still in the process of learning how to coach coaches, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been running most of the practices, and I'm going to get to a point, especially with the second location opening up, that I need to teach them the right what techniques we want shown, right?
Yeah.
And that's not, I don't think as big of it's not as difficult to do that. To teach a coach the right technique is not too difficult. The way we solve that is we essentially have a curriculum. We have YouTube videos where I specifically explain the techniques we want learned. We have different levels in our program, level 1 techniques, level 2 techniques, level 3, level 4. So the technique side is kind of figured out. Now, this is the tough part of coaching, is all the other parts. How to talk to a kid, how to sell the kid on their dream, right? How to remove the limits that the kid has. Doing the stuff like Steven's saying, telling him what he's doing right now, what he's doing wrong. How to help a kid after he just lost a match. You know what I mean? How to help a kid when he's about to quit the sport. So, and by that, those things are way more important than the technique side. Those things are going to impact the kid in wrestling. I'm not even talking about out of life. If you can get those other things down, the kid will be a much better wrestler than if you just had the technique part. Like, your technique could be a little bit off, but if you think, if you can make the kid, if you can make him choose a really big goal, and as a result, he starts practicing 3 times as much, you know what I mean? And you help him deal with what to do when you lose. You help them deal with like all these other mental side of things. That's going to impact them so much more. So that's one of the things I want to be able to do. We do have some training, like online training, that kind of helps with people with that. It helps it, I think, because first they've got to understand that themselves. So the coaches have to get rid of those beliefs. You know what I mean? They've got to set big goals themselves, and they've got to do all those things themselves. So we have the training for the technique. We have some training for that, I guess, mental side of coaching, we could say. So those are the 2 things we want to do, because, think if you had 100 locations and we're all working together to get we have 100 minds working together to get the best techniques, the best philosophies on how to coach, and every program's doing that. I mean, that would make those kids very good, very fast. So that's the nice thing about these like opening up multiple locations. And it's not like, hey, this other coach is going to do at this other location is going to be, showing stuff that we don't think is good.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to work together. The head coach of this facility, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to say, these are the techniques we think are the best. This is what we need to work on as a group. So, but again, going to your point, the toughest thing is not the technique. It's the mental side. It's all the other stuff that comes with wrestling. It's the life coaching, I guess you could say. And that's something we're going to continue to work on training wise. Like, how can we train these up and coming coaches? But we do have some things on it.
Yeah. And going off of that, I got a quick story about that. So when I was in I was going into my 8th grade wrestling season. And at the time, like all 8th graders, you think you know everything. You can't be told, you can't be told what to do. And so for some reason, my mom's like, "You're playing soccer." I'm like, "I'm not playing soccer. You can't, come on. I'm not playing soccer." In my head, I'm like, I'm a wrestler. I wrestle. And so, I'm arguing with my mom. Next thing you know, she's dropped me off at a soccer practice. She drops me off on the field. She pulls off. I watch her leave. I sprint out in the other direction. I'm like, I'm walking home. I'm not I'm a wrestler. I'm not doing soccer. So I leave. I start walking. Next thing you know, my mom pulls around the other way, and I'm like, "Oh, come on." She's like, "Get in the car. Like, we're going home." So I get in the car. I'm going home. And couple weeks go by, or maybe a month or so, and now it's kind of getting ready for wrestling season. And I was planning on wrestling, and then out of nowhere, my mom goes, "You have to wrestle." And I'm like, in my head, I was already planning on it. And she kept, "You got to wrestle, you got to wrestle." So then I'm like, I'm not wrestling. You can't tell me what to do. I'm a grown man. I'm an 8th grade. I'm a grown man. Like, you can't tell me what to do. So in my head, I'm like, now I'm not wrestling. And so she does the same type of thing. She pulls up to practice. I'm like, I'm not getting out of the car. And so I'm sitting there. It's like me, my mom. I got like probably 4 of my brothers in there. And one of my wrestling coaches leaves practice, gets in the car, has a talk with me. He's like, "Get out right now. Like, you are not quitting wrestling." And so I got out of the car, got in the practice room, and once I got on the mat, obviously I loved it. Like, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to wrestle. I had this battle, like a lot of kids do, with, I don't want to be told what to do. I'm an 8th grader. I think I know everything. And so to me, that point in my wrestling, I had coaches who cared enough to literally leave practice, come out, grab me, tell me, "You're not quitting, you're getting back in your wrestling." And that kind of makes me understand more about why some kids quit. So when people come to me and say, "Oh, I think I'm going to not wrestle," or "I think I'm going to go play baseball," or "I think I'm going to do this," it's our job as the coaches to figure out, why is this kid deciding now to all of a sudden go and play another sport? Or why is this kid now all of a sudden deciding he wants to take 6 months off? Sometimes it might be, hey, the kid just loves baseball, and there's nothing wrong with that ish. But a lot of times it's because they're starting to give up on their dreams. Like, they don't believe that they can win a state title. They don't believe that they're cut out for wrestling. And so if that's the case, it's our job as the coach to help that kid work through that. The same way my coaches did to me. They're like, "You're not quitting." Like, they knew that I loved wrestling, and they weren't going to let me quit on my dreams. And if they didn't do that, I would have never went to college to wrestle. I would have never taken second in the country. I would have never started this club. And so for me, I know what my coaches did to get me to stay on the mat. And so I feel the same obligation to help other kids to stay, because I know that the people who put work in and stay consistent with wrestling, at the end of the day, they always look back. And the one thing they say is, "I wish I did more." I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, I should have never wrestled." Like, it's just not a thing. Like, people who wrestle and stick to it, like, a lot of times they look back and go, "I wish I did more." And so for me, as kids come to me and say, "I want to take 6 months off," or "I want to do this," or "I want to do that," it's not that they're not allowed to, but it's my job to help them to see, what's actually stopping them from doing it. Because sometimes it's like they set this goal of being a state champ, and then they went out in the off season, and then 4 competitions in a row, they went 0-2 barbecue. And it's like, well, are you stopping because you don't think you can do it? Or are you stopping because of some other reason? Because you really like football more, or whatever it is. So, I want to do the same thing the coaches did for me, which was help me work through that. I want to help the kids work through the things that are holding them back so that they can actually go and accomplish their dreams.
Would you have ever imagined that you guys would have made this big of a divot in the wrestling community, not only in your state, but in your life, from when you started filling in for wrestling partners, and you go D1, D3, state champion, national qualifiers, finalist? Did you ever think that this was the path that you were going to be on? I mean, you guys talk about how you kind of had your life set that it was more than wrestling, and that, you know, it was going to lead to bigger things. But was this the end goal? And was this a goal that you maybe actually achieved, an obnoxious goal that you achieved?
Yeah, so I think wrestling wise and like all my accomplishments with wrestling, I definitely had that kind of planned out.
Mm.
At least like I didn't know exactly how it was going to go, but I know I wanted to go D1. I believed I could definitely be varsity. You know, I probably didn't know like how good I would have gotten. But I think it was the trajectory of, I think a lot of people didn't believe I could have done what I did, but the trajectory I went from my junior to senior year, how much better I got, I was like, yeah, I could definitely accomplish what I ended up doing. Um, Now, as far as after college, I had a lot of different things going through my head. It was like weird, like, because I'm so focused on like wrestling and achieving my
Hmm.
wrestling goal that, you know, that last year when I'm like, I ended up getting married like right after my senior year. And I'm thinking like, I was juggling my last year with what to do with my life and like how to provide for my wife and like find all these financial things. Like I never thought about finances, like personal finances ever. So I was like, you know, my senior year, I'm reading books on like, you know, how to do like,
Build good
you know, house
habits.
hack or Airbnbs and like whatever,
Yeah.
like whatever finance books, uh, all these like other stuff.
Hmm.
So, and then I was thinking like, so my plan, I had a lot of things run through my head, but I was like, okay, I'm probably gonna get a job as an engineer, then become a teacher, and then coach at a high school and be a teacher and coach at a high school. That would be my retirement, like teaching at a high school and coaching the high school team. Maybe that my kid wrestles at or something. So that was kind of like, that was what I thought was going to happen pretty much.
Mm.
And then I got a job pretty close to home in Connecticut, and my wife didn't get a job, so I accepted that one. So then we moved to Rhode Island, and then I'm like, oh well, might as well hope I'll help out with the club, you know. And then like I was like, I hate engineering. Um, this is horrible. I had to drive like an hour every day to work, and I was like, yeah, let's just figure out how to make this work. And then even with the club, like I didn't know we were going to start a second club this early. Maybe, you know,
Mm.
I'm like, my stop was actually I'm going to be a head coach. I'm going to be a head coach at Iron Faith for the rest of my life. And then I'm like, well, yeah, like I'm there now. So what's the next thing? The next thing is, yeah, like what if I was head coach or whatever of 100 locations or whatever, right? Like what if it's something bigger? What if I can impact, you know, 200 times 100 is 20,000 kids, right? I think. Yeah.
I think
You're the one with an engineering degree.
Yeah.
it
So I can
sounds good.
impact 20,000 kids, or I can impact 200 kids. And especially if I believe like, obviously I believe my technique is right, but I believe if I can, uh, I believe the morals and the character that I'm teaching these kids is the right thing. So if we
Mm.
can have those, like everyone thinks like you can have those coaches that are teaching the right morals and they're the right role models for these kids, like, and I can help kind of manage those coaches and manage the people that are helping the other kids. Now that's kind of, I guess, my bigger goal now. You know what I mean? I want
Absolutely.
to, you know, and obviously like I love winning too. So, but you know, if you run every club in the country though, then I guess somebody's gonna be winning. So you'll be winning.
Somebody's gonna win. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have 20,000 kids, somebody's gonna win a national title for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, um,
Was this your goal? Like this was what you worked towards? Did you
yeah,
achieve
so,
it?
I had different goals. I didn't know exactly what I'd be doing. I knew I'd be coaching in some fashion. And so the second I finished my college season, my club coach, John Clark, said, hey, do you want to coach with me, be a head assistant at the school Sacred Heart, Division One program? And he just like said it like at a practice, like, hey, if I get this job, do you want to be the head coach? I'm like, yeah, sure. I didn't
Yeah.
even think, yeah, of course. He's like, it's like
Yeah.
an hour away or something like that. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. He gets the job. He goes,
Hmm.
I got the job. So I'm like, I guess I'm coaching at Sacred Heart. And so for a
It was
while,
fantastic.
that was great. I really enjoyed it.
Hmm.
And so for a while, I'm driving back and forth. Well, we're both driving back and forth. Hour and like I don't know, hour and a half, hour 15, hour 40.
Definitely
It was
2
like
hours.
it might have been two. Yeah, it was a long.
Yeah.
It was a long drive,
Yeah.
and it got to the point where like we're leaving at like 5 a.m. We're getting there, working till like 9 o'clock, and leaving to go home just to sleep and turn around, come back. And it
Yeah.
started getting to the point like I started. I'm like, man, I can't keep driving back and forth. Like I'm dying. So I started
Hmm.
sleeping at Stop and Shop. I started sleeping at a Stop and Shop in my car. I go inside.
Actually?
That's serious. I go
Oh my
inside.
gosh.
I go inside. I get like a chocolate milk and a muffin, and I'd go into work. I'd work all day. Shower at the school. Leave at 10 o'clock. Go back to Stop and Shop. Do it again the next day. Until eventually, Clark and I got a apartment that we on like the second floor of a garage that we stayed at, which was much better than the car. But um, as I started getting towards the end of that season for wrestling, I knew that I wanted to get married to my girlfriend at the time, which is Caitlin. And so it just didn't make, I couldn't really make it work where for me, I'd be driving back and forth and she living there and me
Yeah.
living here at the time. So I decided to step down, get married. And then when I did, I moved back to Rhode Island to get married. And I helped at Johnson Wales for a season. Then it kind of gets to the end of the season at Johnson Wales. I'm scraping by for money. I'm like, I just got married. I don't know what I'm doing in my life. I'm doing some private lessons and I'm helping out at Johnson Wales as like the fourth or fifth assistant coach. And I was also doing some work for my dad for a startup business, and it was like not really moving very fast, so I wasn't making anything on that. And I'm like, man, I'm really tight for money. I don't really know what I want to do with my life. I know I love coaching. Like the only thing that got me fired up was like coaching in the room and then going and do the private lessons. Like I wasn't really excited about much else. And I was reading a book at the time. I think it was either one of like Grant Cardone's books. It was 10X or one of those books. And it was talking about, what is holding you back.
Mm.
And at the time, my wife Caitlin was trying to make an Olympic team. She still is. And so I was always afraid, like, hey, if I go and start this club, like that's too big of a risk. And what if she needs me to do something else to help her make the Olympics? And so I was reading that, and then I realized that I was using that as an excuse instead of a reason to do it. And so that
Mm.
was kind of a switch in my mind. I'm like, man, this whole time I've been saying like I can't do it because of this. And in reality, it should have been, hey, I have to do it because of this. Like it should have been my reason to, not my reason not to. And so I go into practice at JU, I think the next day, and Coach Lonnie Morris, we're just kind of talking, and I didn't really say much, but he goes, I think I was either, I don't know if I brought it up or he brought it up, and I was like, yeah, I kind of, want to start a club at some point. And he goes, oh, why don't you do it here, like out of the Johnson Wells room? I'm like, all right, yeah, that's kind of interesting. He goes, oh, and Jack will wrestle, like his son Jack. Oh, yeah, I'll wrestle for you. I was like, yeah, that'd be kind of interesting. He goes, oh, yeah, you can start tomorrow. And then I'm like, okay, no, now it's getting real. And so I'm like, you know what? Yeah, let's do it. So that very night, I go home, I do all the business paperwork to get a LLC so that I can rent space from the university.
Jay.
Yep. And then I'm like, I'm fired up. Like I just took second at nationals, 2 years ago. I'm from Rhode Island. Like everyone knows me. This is going to be great. I start running practices and nobody shows up. I'm sitting there like it's me and Jack, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I'm like, I might have just made like one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made. And so I'm calling a bunch of people every day. I'm messaging as many people as I can. Finally like 2 kids show up and then they disappear. It gets to the point I'm calling people up and I start I'm like, come for free. I don't care. Like, I just need someone to coach. Like I got a club and I got no one at practice. And so eventually what I started to do, this was kind of the help to grow the business, is I started to reach out to the middle school team coaches. And I said, hey, why don't you guys come by for your, instead of practicing in your room, why don't you come by, let me run a practice, and I'd get like 2 or 3 teams there. So like as people came in, it felt like there was a lot going on. Like, oh, this is legit. And that was kind of my way to like get people in the door, just to like let them know, like, hey, I know a little bit about wrestling. Like, let me help you out. And just as things started to pick up, that's when COVID hit. So we're about 3 months into it. COVID hits. We get the call that we're shut down. And so, there's a whole other story, but we started making hand sanitizer for the state. So that's a whole side thing. And about like 6 or 8 months later, like I'm staying connected with some of the students, asking how they're doing. And pretty much more or less, a lot of people kind of the same story. Like, hey, I'm sitting at home, I'm doing nothing. There's no school, there's no sports. Like, I don't know what to do with my life. And so I just was like, hey, like, I'm going to find a spot. And eventually I just like picked a date. I was like, by this date, I'm going to have a place. And then I went and started looking for a spot. And it was more or less like impossible to find anything. Like, middle of COVID, like impossible to get in contact with people. Like, can't go and look at any spaces. And eventually, I find this space that we're in now, which is a second floor space. And there was a church in there before, and they got shut down because of COVID. So it was kind of like, it was an opportunity for us to go in and take a space because it was completely empty.
Yeah.
And, as that happened, I started to set goals of a certain number of students. And eventually it was like, hey, our next goal is to get Ebed on full time. And my big goal, and I had a thing of notes when I first started the club. So after I talked with Lonnie, and my dad had actually had some impact on that as well, I basically wrote down like 100 students. Like, that was my goal. Like, I want to get to 100 students, and I had a dollar value. Like, if I can get 100 students and this much money, like, then I'll be able to coach for the rest of my life. Like, it'll be perfect. And as I started to approach that, I realized, like, man, I'm just not thinking big enough. Like, I'm thinking too small. And, my thought, I was like I'm being selfish. Like, I'm only thinking about me in that sense. I'm thinking like, what do I want? Like, I want one location with 100 people making this amount of money, instead of, hey, what can I do for other people? And so as I started to really think more about, hey, how can I do the most for the most people? It started to help me think on a bigger scale. And that's kind of when I started saying, okay, maybe we can do 10 locations. Maybe that's even possible. And then I was like, hey, well, if I can do 10, why not do 10 again and then do it again? And so that's kind of where, exactly. And that's kind of where our goal of 100 locations is kind of coming from. And obviously we're far from it, but if we're going to tell our students and our athletes to dream big and set high goals, like, we better be doing the same thing. And so, like, this is our way of saying, like, hey, we're giving you guys advice and we're telling you to do these things, and we're going to do the very same things in our life. And so that way, it's not like just do as you're told. It's like you're going to be doing, a lot of times, you do what kind of the people around you do. So if we're
Yeah, no worries. No, so I'm gonna, I guess that, this is definitely the path that you wanted to be on, and this is exactly where you're supposed to be, through that long drawn out story, which was fantastic, by the way. I didn't know that you slept at Stop and Shop as an assistant Division 1 coach. That's very ballsy. Yeah. It's funny because, like, you're only obligated to that. But yeah, listen, the life of a broke assistant coach, that's exactly what it is. But listen, I mean, we've gone well over time, but this was a fantastic conversation. I hope that you guys, you get to your 100 clubs, 100 locations. If you even throw one, personally, if you even throw one down in Connecticut, like Southern Connecticut, I'll run one. You could teach me that. And I would love to help out in any way that I possibly can. I love the content. I'm always watching it. It's very helpful. I'm out of the sport, but I'm still learning stuff from Ebed when he's teaching people how to get into a shot. I'm like, oh, I never knew that. Let me go try that out. And now, subconsciously, I joined like an MMA gym. So I figured out in Danbury that there's like 3 MMA gyms that we have. And I'm like going to each one. And I'm like, well, I learned this, even though we're doing jujitsu. But you guys are even teaching me something. I'm removed from the sport, but it's fantastic what you guys are doing, and I hope that you get all the success and just keep it up because it looks fantastic. Absolutely. This has been an episode of Off the Mat, your affirmation podcast for mental health, your mental health affirmation podcast for athletes around the world. I've been joined with Ebed Gerald and Stephen Gerald, successful wrestlers as well as coaches for Iron Faith in Rhode Island. Uh, we will catch you next time.